Good evening, members, officers and members of the public. Welcome to Tendring District Council Planning Committee on Tuesday the 13th of May. Just some housekeeping. If you could please put your mobile phones on silent or turn them off. And if the fire alarm goes off, it's real. There'll be no drill. So if it's real, please exit and follow the green arrows. This committee meeting is being live streamed. It's also being recorded, and the link to the live stream can be found on the council's website at www.tenderingdc.gov.uk live meetings. For the purpose of the recording, I will introduce everyone. I'm Councillor Maria Fowler, Chairman of the Planning Committee, and I will introduce the members of the committee separately. Councillor Maurice Alexander.
Good evening, Chairman.
Councillor Richard Everett.
Evening, Chairman.
Councillor Bernard Goldman.
Good evening, Chair.
Councillor Adrian Smith.
Good evening, Chair.
Councillor Anne Wiggins.
Good evening, Chairman.
And my Vice Chairman, Councillor John White.
Good evening, Chairman.
Thank you, members. The officers assisting us this evening are from Committee Services, Bethany Jones and Katie Coppenall. From Planning Services, Planning Officer Michael Pingram, Planning Manager John Pateman G, and the Planning Solicitor Mrs Joanne Fisher. There are no changes to the agenda running order. The application will be presented by the officer, followed by public speaking in the order of the applicant or agent, any members of the public who have already asked to speak for or against the application, a speaker from the town or parish council, and finally the ward councillor. Members of the committee will then have the chance to question the officer, and once all the questions have been answered, the committee will then debate. And when all points are discussed, finally I shall ask if we have a resolution and call for a proposer, seconder, and the committee will then vote according to the normal rules. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence and substitutions. Please, Bethany.
Thank you, Chair. There are no absences today.
Thank you, Bethany. Minutes of the last meeting. Members, if you've had a look, those of you that were present at the minutes of the last meeting, if I could have a proposer, if you're happy with those. Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Goldman, seconded. Thank you. Are we all in agreement? Thank you, members. Item 3, declarations of interest. Councillor Smith.
I'd like to announce I'm the ward councillor for St Bartholomew's ward, which is where the bowling club is in agenda item 6, but I'm not predetermined.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Are there any others from committee members? I have one, and this is for item 5 on the agenda, which is planning application 24/01922/VOC, land to the rear of 135 and 137 Franks Road, Dovercourt. I am one of the 2 ward members and I am predetermined on this application. So I will withdraw from the committee for this application and I'll hand over to our Vice Chairman, Councillor White. Item 4 on the agenda, questions on notice pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 38.
Thank you, Chair. There are none.
Thank you, Bethany. So item 5 on the agenda, I will now hand over to Councillor White.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I believe you're leaving the room, so right, we'll make a start on this. As the Chairman just said, it's planning application 24/01922. It's land at the rear of 135 and 137 Franks Road, Dovercourt. And Mr. Pingram is going to introduce this one to us.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, everybody. Yes, so this application is land to the rear of 135 and 137 Franks Road, Dovercourt, and sorry, and it seeks retrospective planning permission for alterations to a scheme of 5 dwellings that were previously approved. Specifically, the ground levels have altered in comparison to that earlier scheme, and these ground levels range between minus 0.6 metres all the way through to an increase of 1.5 metres. It's just worth pointing out that the design, layout and scale remains as previously approved though. The item is before members following a call-in request from Councillor Joe Henderson in the event that the application was recommended for approval. So here's site location plan, highlighting the site in red, so you can see it comes off of Franks Road, and there's a development that's not shown on this plan of 9 dwellings directly adjacent to the west. And the 5 dwellings were previously approved in this site here, 3 to the north and 2 to the south. Google image, so you can see that it's sort of sited behind the existing residential built form. It's generally quite an urbanised character, lots of predominantly residential development to all sides, and it falls within the settlement boundary for Dovercourt. So if I just start sort of wind the clock back a bit and go back to when the previous application was approved, again you can see that there's 3 dwellings to the north element of the site and 2 dwellings to the southern end, and this plan actually shows those 9 dwellings as well. So just to reiterate again that the design, the layout and the scale of these dwellings is exactly as was approved on here. All we are looking at tonight is the difference in the ground levels. So I'll do my best to try and explain that through this image here. So it's probably not going to be too clear on the screen, but you can see the existing and proposed levels. There's a series of different figures, and essentially they range from, so the northern end, so if I sort of flick between 2 different slides, so if I start up on the left hand side of this screen, that is the equivalent of being approximately where my mouse is hovering at the moment there, and we're just going to run south down the site like that. So as we run south down the site, you can see, so the green line was where the ground levels were previously, and then you can see the difference. So at the sort of northern end, there's not much difference at all. In fact, in 1 or 2 places, there's a slight decrease. So the main impact is the increase in the ground levels at this element of the site, which, just to go back and reiterate, is just sort of this element of the scheme here. So this is plots D and E from the original scheme. So I'll just run through a couple of other drawings for you. So this just shows the front of plots. So this is plot E, plot E on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side you've got the adjacent neighbouring property, which is part of the other development that's currently not occupied. You can see the blue line here that sort of shows the difference between what was approved before and what's happening now. And in this site layout plan here, it just sort of shows you the impact of the potential neighbours. So we've got, can't quite see it along here, but the distance there is approximately 27 metres between the dwelling, the rear of the plot E and number 21 there, and it's about approximately 16 metres from the rear boundary through to number 21 there. So I'll just run through some site photos. I feel with this case in particular, yesterday's site visit was probably more important than any photos I can show you, because it really helps to get a feel for it yourself. But I'll run through the photos that I took a couple of months back. So this is plot E on the left-hand side, and again this is the neighbouring property on the adjacent development, and it's my understanding that this has not yet been occupied following yesterday's visit. This is another site photo looking from the rear of or the rear/side of plot E, and so on the right hand side you can see plot E, and on the left hand side that is the neighbouring property. So you can see there's existing hedgerow along there, and there's 3 windows in total along this elevation that potentially going to be impacted. This is me stood at the rear of plot E at patio doors, looking out towards what would be number 21. So you can see there's a large existing vegetation and not really any overlooking concerns in that regard. Similarly, this is me stood by the patio doors of plot D. Obviously there's not the vegetation on this plot, so there's a little bit more impact, but again, in terms of overlooking, it doesn't appear to me that there's potential of that on this occasion. And then this photo is me doing my best to try and show the difference in the ground level. So on the right hand side you've got the development, so plot E is in the distance there and plot D is roughly where my mouse is hovering, and then this is the neighbouring property. So there's approximately 16 metres from that property to this boundary here, and about 27 metres between the actual dwellings. And then this is just a photo, just to point out, this is one we received from the neighbouring property, number 23 I believe it is, and this would form part of their objection. So this isn't a photo that I took myself, but it hopefully gives you a bit of an indication as to how it looks from that side. I do understand that as part of the site visit yesterday you did visit one of the neighbouring gardens, so hopefully you got a good feel for the site that way as well. So in terms of the assessment, the principal development has already been accepted, so it's in the settlement boundary and the previous permission's been implemented, so no issues in that regard. In terms of the scale, layout and appearance, as I've said, the design of the dwellings, the layout, everything is exactly as was approved. It's purely just a different size in ground levels. So the impact to the street scene will be minimal on the basis that to the front of plots D and E, it's very similar to what was previously approved. The main impact is to sort of the rear of those two properties. So the main consideration with this is going to be the impact to neighbours. As I've touched upon, if I just go to, yeah, that one will do. So we've got the plot to the left-hand side to the west here, and you've got the neighbouring properties to the rear down there. They're the ones most likely to be impacted by these changes. In terms of the one to the west, there is going to be a degree of impact, that's inevitable, but we've weighed up that there is a 2 metre separation distance, existing hedgerow that blocks a lot of the built form, and of the 3 windows that are located down the side of that property, 1 serves an ensuite and 1 is a secondary window to a kitchen, so they're not main habitable rooms that would sort of frequently be occupied. And also I think it's sort of worth pointing out that the property is not yet occupied, so any future buyer would be aware of this situation and would know that prior to purchase. So combination of all those factors is that while there is a degree of harm, we don't consider it so significant that it justifies a refusal reason. Moving to the plots to the rear, again there is going to be a degree of impact. The fencing is going to appear higher, and obviously the dwellings themselves higher than what was approved. However, again, we've weighed up the 27 metre separation distance, the 16 metre distance to the actual fencing. There is potential to develop, under permitted development rights, to have rear boundary fencing of up to 2 metres. So we've had to weigh in that into the overall balance. And so while there has been an increase, it goes up to 3.3 metres. So because they can do 2 metres without needing planning permission, we're essentially just looking at that additional 1.3 metres and whether that harm is significant enough. As by the photos I showed earlier, I don't believe there's any overlooking issues, and therefore, again, on balance, while we consider that there is a degree of harm, it's not enough to be for us to recommend a reason for refusal. In other points, Essex Highways have confirmed that they've raised no objections. There's sufficient parking and there's sufficient private amenity space. So the key for this application really is the impact to the neighbours and whether you as members feel that the harm is significant or not really. So we've recommended on balance approval for the reasons that I've outlined. But yeah, any questions please let me know. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. Now for the speakers, the agent, Mr. Pomeroy, please. And I think, sir, you're well aware of the procedure that we have here. Once you get settled and your microphone on, you've got 3 minutes, sir.
Good evening, members. My name is Robert Pomeroy and I'm a Chartered Town Planner. The applicant accepts that the ground levels as built have changed from the original approved plan. Building homes is not an exact science, and at the planning stage, what might be needed on site, say to make the drainage work, is often not known. On many occasions, there's a need to alter levels on the site to tie in with the levels of neighbouring land, and usually this balances out. In this case, at the front of the property, the level change is quite modest, and at the rear it's more significant. What also exaggerates the relationship between the property alongside the application dwelling is the fact that the developers chose to reduce the levels on their side. The best way to understand this is to refer to the hedge between the two dwellings. The hedge was there before either dwelling was built. The base of the hedge thus represents the original ground level, and you will see that the neighbouring property has been built below the base of the hedge, so lower than the original ground level, and you'll probably see that on that front elevation drawing. The applicant has made this application to regularise this situation, so the decision now is to decide if the level changes are acceptable both visually and in relation to the residential amenity. Your professional officers have assessed the situation over a number of months now and have concluded that there is insufficient harm to residential amenity that would warrant a refusal that could be supported at an appeal. In relation to the impact on the dwellings to the rear of the site in Gordon Road, if you were to look out from the rear of the application property, it is not possible to see the private sitting out area of the gardens of the properties in Gordon Road, so that amenity is protected. This is due to the rear fencing and the very tall conifers in the neighbouring gardens, which are right on the common boundary. More importantly, if these elements were not there, the arrangement would be acceptable in planning policy terms, as the distance between the back of the application dwelling and the back of the Gordon Road houses is 27 metres, so is 2 metres further than the council's adopted policy. Members will be aware that in these situations it is the policy position that is important, and despite the changes in levels, the relationship remains policy compliant, hence officers recommend approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And now we have a member of the public speaking against the application, Mr. Sinclair Pierce. Right. If you'd like to join us, sir, and then if you can switch on your microphone. It's the little face of the... That's the one.
Very easy one at the bottom there with the voice we go.
And you have 3 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Now. I understand I have a couple of minutes to say some stuff. A lot of what I was going to cover has already been covered by the gentleman here by giving you a lot of the information on elevations, let's say, of where I am the owner of 135 Franks Road, and I'm well aware of what has gone on. Regardless of how anything has been done, I'm not going to read from this exactly as I wrote it because so much has been covered, and I'll be able to cover it much easier with the help of you guys. If we could have slide 13 put up. Slide 13 is the rear of I. So I-153, it's the furthest over, not where the gentleman pointed out being vastly close to, being in this area, specifically the two that are behind my property. I'm well aware of how far they go down and how far they shouldn't be going down or how far they have gone up. This is behind the buildings from the garden that's behind ours in Orchard Road. Under no circumstances would anybody build a fence without a gravel board at the bottom if it's under stress. If that is underneath there, you have 4 composite sleepers which have a life expectancy of somewhere between 20 and 25 years, according to the people who manufacture them. They are completely under stress because they're completely, as you can always see there, under the realm of the height of what they put behind it. This is now an 11-foot wall, thereabouts, on his side. I shouldn't be worried about it, but at the end of the day, you guys should be, because in 20 years' time, that will collapse. As will my next door neighbours on 137, where his one is much similarly along the side where they've built it up as high as they have. You've built a property at least 3 foot taller than all of the others. These were built by one company, these were built by a different company that have come in and done groundwork. My understanding is not the first time they built something, but it certainly looks like they've moved the land from one point and then rather than taking it off site, just moved it straight over and used it as to pack out this one that they put up there. I disagree with the gentleman who says he's not able to see directly from. I've viewed the house. They're up for sale. Two of them have actually got something against them, guarantees. So I understand how difficult it is to take in quickly, but there's no way that these can be built without rock cages. They have to have rock cages around them for it to survive. The entire site of what they've put around the back there is the only safe way of stopping subsidence. I can't say much more than that. I can go on and on and on about all the stuff that I've got here, but that in itself is enough. You've got to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And now we have the ward member, Councillor Joe Henderson. Councillor Henderson, welcome, and as you appreciate as ward councillor, you get 5 minutes should you want.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you, committee members. I was first contacted by residents of Gordon Road mid-November 2024 complaining that the ground levels of this development had been built up by the developer, resulting in the bungalows being too high, by 6 foot approximately. I did speak with the planning department to reiterate my residents' concerns. And I note on the 23rd of December 2024, an application for a variation of conditions was received by TDC. And I would like to obviously put a question out there, I know I won't get the answer, why the developer built up this land, changing his original approved application. Yes, the bungalows haven't changed, but these ground levels have such a bad impact on those residents of Gordon Road. It is with some grave concern that the bungalows were continued to be built, even though advice was given to halt. Harwich Town Council, who make comments, and I'm a town councillor, objected to this variation of conditions, and the comments were as follows: invasion of privacy to the gardens to the rear and the side, overlooking concerns. And I must say, having visited the site yesterday, whilst the planning committee were there, I'm 5'2" and I stood on the patio and I could see in the windows, the top bedroom windows of the property opposite, and I had flat shoes on. Development will appear intrusive and oppressive, which are part of some of the planning conditions, and it's in breach of earlier planning conditions, and boundary treatments are out of scale and character with the area. 8.14 within your packs, my opinion, makes excuses for the developer not building to the approved planning permissions with these heights. These approximate measurements are playing down the true facts and the impact on the residents of Gordon Road and the neighbouring property on Franks Road. 8.15, can I question the view that officers did not consider the increase in ground levels has resulted in the new dwellings overlooking? The objectors that have put in within your packs have stated otherwise. I think nearly every resident that has put in have said that it does. 9.1 mentions the street scene remaining relatively unaltered. To all of the properties around these bungalows concerned, this remains a big issue. It isn't, the street scene isn't just from the front. The street scene is if you're living around it. I am, really, really concerned with, and I know obviously you've shown the photographs, I am concerned with what these residents have been left with. It's not a safe structure, and I think it's not what they should have to, in their back gardens, they shouldn't have to look at something so ugly and unsightly when, yes, these bungalows look very nice, but why did the developer carry on building them, totally ignore our planning committee? He could have halted, he could have tried to sort this out, but no, they plough ahead, and I do believe this is going to open the floodgates to all developers across Tendring thinking, we can build what we like. It's probably cheaper to build than to remove this land. One of the residents, who was asking for a refusal, it's right, it's simply not acceptable to choose your own ground zero after planning has been given. There's so many things, and I've got highlights on all of them. So one of the residents, I urge the local planning authority to refuse this variation application and take decisive action to uphold the original planning conditions. Approving this application would compromise the integrity of the planning process and fail to protect the interests of affected residents. He did say in his comment, which did go in back in January, that people could go and visit his property. One of the other residents, we would like to strongly object to the bungalows being built behind us on 23 Gordon Road. We have no privacy from our bedroom windows and we can see straight into the lounge. They are too high. The concrete sleepers they have used don't appear to be adequate for holding back this amount of earth, especially over the long term. You know, the stress it's putting on these residents that live around it. Whilst they might look lovely from the front and whilst it might not affect them because nobody's living there, and I really hope people are sensible and don't buy the two levelled ones, because I believe one will get possibly flooded out from this. You know, if a builder puts in an application, it's not the first time it's happened, and I think if this carries on from this planning committee and they don't make a stand on this, he should have stopped, he should have rectified it, and he should have done to what they'd put their application in. I do my job, I'm a hairdresser. If I don't cut the hair to what people have asked, I wouldn't be in a job. They can carry on, totally break all planning regulations, build it, you know, it's still, they're up and they still sit there on them. So I would ask the planning committee, please look at these
Councillor
poor
Henderson,
residents.
can you wind down now, please?
Yeah. Remember the residents that live behind, not just the ones that are going to be living in the new bungalows. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no comments from me at this stage. Thank you, Chairman.
Now's your turn for questions, certainly. Councillor Everett, I saw.
Thank you. Can you tell me on what date did it become apparent to this department, to the planning department, that the building was not being built within the spirit or intention of the planning permission given?
Thank you. Yeah, I can't give you the exact date. It was the beginning of October. I want to say the 4th of October, but I might have that slightly wrong. Our enforcement team visited the site at that stage. That's the first time I'm personally aware that the council were involved. So it was with enforcement through from that period through to, I believe, December the 23rd when the application was submitted.
And usually it would be the case with the planning enforcement that advice would be given to the applicant as to what to do to rectify the situation. What was that advice, please?
Yes, so I spoke with the enforcement team just to clarify exactly what was said at that time. The advice given was to stop works at that point. They were told that a planning application would be submitted, and therefore it was not appropriate for the council to issue a stop notice at that time because it's to allow them the opportunity to put in the planning application and rectify it the way that they have. But the advice given was, you know, you're doing that at your own risk, basically.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I might ask two questions. Firstly, if Councillor Henderson hadn't called this in, we wouldn't have been here tonight. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And secondly, given the fact that they have built over and above the level originally agreed, you have said that that is acceptable on the fencing as a composite. Would you have suggested something different?
Sorry, just to clarify, are you asking about the material of the fencing, whether we would have considered that appropriate?
I'm literally just saying what Mr. Sinclair Pierce said, where he said that it shouldn't be a composite because it's only got a 25-year lease or lifespan. Would that have been a consideration? Would you have said that they can't build it because of that?
Well, the fencing is standard. Ultimately, the issue is what's sitting underneath it. How we, in its self materials, it's not inappropriate. We've got sleepers. People use sleepers as boundary treatment. We've got fencing. Whether the degree of the extent of it is in debate acceptable, or whether it contributes to a harm to amenity, that's the judgment going forward. I think if we were saying that the boundary treatment in itself would be a sole reason for refusal, we haven't put that on the table before you, so therefore I suppose our default position is that we are recommending as it stands as acceptable.
Thank you, Chair. Please excuse my sore throat. The issue for me here is staring me blatantly in the face. One, it sits proudly between where it is now and the adjoining property. So who actually owns it and who maintains it? Should it break that levy, who will then go forth and repair that?
Yeah, if you're asking about who will have ownership of that fence, then it will be the future occupants of the two properties, plot D and E. But yeah, obviously they're not occupied at the moment.
So, Chair, I wish to continue. Okay, to reach what's before us here, we are looking at something that's been artificially built up to that level on the top of the sleeper slabs, the composites. Am I right?
Yeah, so I think this drawing hopefully just shows the change. So the green line running along is what the original ground levels were, and essentially the rest of that drawing above is the difference. So that's the artificial increase, I suppose. Yeah.
So, if could we put back the original slide 13, please? Could you? Sorry, can you hear me? Could you put back the original slide, please?
Oh.
No, there we go. So, what I don't quite understand is that this has been carried out to facilitate the bringing in of the other properties that have been built from the original planning application. With that said, I'm a little bit wary of this, and please, correct me, I'm open for that, this could be a precedent. So if you wanted to do this again, you merely take a piece of land and do what you see at the bottom, fill it up with earth, and then put a fence on top of it. Now, to me, although it's of different colour, is it the same fence, but two different stages of its construction?
To answer the second point first, no, it's just this new fence here that's been around. The bit underneath was already there. That's separate. To answer your question about setting a precedent and the whole issue of retrospective applications as a wider point, I guess, as we know, we've sort of discussed this at previous committees, that retrospective applications in planning law are acceptable. We can't treat them any differently to one that's not retrospective. In terms of setting a precedent, I would say that the risk in this particular, every case would be case by case. So we'd have to assess what that, if they were to do the exact same thing here on a different site, what would the impacts be to the neighbours, for example? We'd have to assess that on a case by case basis. But I wouldn't suggest that being here and going through all of this process over 6 months or whatever it's taken to get here, and the risk of having a refusal would set a precedent that other developers would want to adhere to. That would be my suggestion.
Chair, I'm going to ask a very unusual question which I've never asked before in these chambers. Would it be possible if we could have some guidance from our legal person on whether or not we could be setting a precedent, because it's going to alter what I think for the final decision?
Thank you, Chair. I think as the planning officer explained, each case is looked at on its own merits, its own facts. It's when dealing with works that have been carried out as a breach of planning control, so whether that's without permission or breach of a condition, every case that would be looked at by the enforcement officer they have to look at or be guided by our local development plan policies to determine whether it's something that might have been granted permission had it been an application and not something that you're looking at retrospectively. They would also need to look at the national planning policy guidance. They would also need to consider the national planning policy framework. And when I referred to the national planning policy guidance, that there is particular guidance on enforcement and how you look at enforcement matters and the powers that you exercise and how you might exercise those powers. So in answer to your question, each case is individual. There might be specific factors about amenity. There might be specific factors about particular duties, as you know, that apply in planning law sometimes, because each site is an individual site. So I would say it wouldn't set a precedent, because it's not an unusual thing for unauthorised development to take place, whether that be mistakenly or deliberately or whatever that might be. But as a planning enforcement authority, or that side of it, we would just have to look at it in the context of policy, material considerations, like you would any other planning application that come forward, and decide if it's something that is acceptable. Would it have been granted permission? If that's something that an officer decides as potentially possible, or they feel it's in accordance with policy, they can invite a retrospective application to regularise the position. If it's something that is considered to be harmful or significantly harmful, then it's as a local planning authority and our enforcement powers, do we consider it expedient to take enforcement action? So it might be something that's so harmful that we wouldn't invite a planning application for, because it isn't something that we think is in accordance with our plan, or material considerations indicate that it's not acceptable. So it might be then that the matter is dealt with through enforcement powers, either informally or formally. So the fact that something is built without permission is a breach of planning control. What the officer report is saying is, in their consideration of the matter, it is in accordance with, or can be considered in their view to be in accordance with, the local plan policy and all other material planning considerations, and that's their recommendation to you. But as members of the committee, obviously you need to look at all of the planning considerations and decide for yourself whether or not retrospective permission can be granted in this particular case. But I'm sorry, that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but it won't set a precedent, because you're dealing with the facts of this particular case, and putting in a retrospective application is normal planning enforcement practice if it's something that officers say is in accordance with policy or should be granted permission potentially. But ultimately, members, it's your decision today to look at the harm that's been identified and to decide if you feel that permission ought to be granted or not. Thank you.
Right. Councillor Everett.
Thank you, Chairman. If this were a completely fresh application, starting again from scratch, we would expect to see some advice from Essex County Council about sustainable drainage. We don't have anything in here about the situation of water runoff, etc., and how it will affect the various properties around. And I would have thought that in this particular case that was particularly pertinent, because the water runoff from this is going to go in one of two places, and one of those is going to be flooding next door property. Can the officer tell me what advice, if any, Essex County Council have given us on sustainable drainage in this case?
Okay, yes. So the original application was for 5 dwellings, and that doesn't meet the threshold of being a major development. So we would only consult them at that time if it was a major development. And just to add to that, I can confirm that on the original application, it was proposed to connect to the existing mains. And yeah, so within this current application, no, we've not consulted with Essex County, and because it's a variation. But the original application, we couldn't, or they wouldn't provide comments because it's a minor development anyway.
So you're saying here that we don't have that information about the potential damage that this could do to surrounding properties because of the fact that the original sustainable drainage scheme was not kept to.
There was no original sustainable drainage scheme because this does underneath the threshold for consultation on that basis. The county will not look at anything unless it's 10 or more, and this was a additional section of 5, so therefore they are not involved, and they haven't commented accordingly either on the original, which I'm looking at the moment, or indeed the current. I will say though, it does still get covered by building regulations, obviously, and passed as part of that process for which this has been gone through in due process.
So we don't know, basically. We don't know what the effect of this is going to be.
In terms of where does the water go, without pulling up building control records, no, you don't have that information as a planning authority before you.
Can I just ask a question? Being a bit sort of grey, blonde, whatever you might like to say, and that may not be PC. When this was originally built, were the properties supposed to be so high, or is it what the developer has put up since? So that this is what has come to it. So was it supposed to be like this originally?
So within the original application, there was no mention of an increase or change in ground levels at all. So we were approving based on what was there previously. And the best way I can sort of explain that is just to show what the green line running down here, that is what the ground levels were at that time. During the construction, they just have been raised, and that is essentially what we're dealing with here tonight. But yes, no, the original 5 dwellings approved, it was assumed it was on the green line that's sort of running along here.
So, in my opinion, therefore they must have possibly thought there might have been something wrong, hence building it as they've built it.
Yeah, I can't answer as to why this was done. It's not a material planning consideration. It's not something that we can ask of the developer, but all we can assess is that it has been done, and this is what's before us.
Thank you.
Perhaps I can ask a question. We're talking about building control here. Now, my understanding, once a building is being put up, building control do visit from time to time. Are we saying that building control are happy with this very high fencing and the temporary wall underneath to retain the soil?
I don't know. We don't know if that's the wall or the fence itself is actually part of the building control application. You're dealing with a different regime. Ultimately, you have to deal with the planning merits of the case before you. Chair, do you mind if I take a moment and just address, if I can?
Yeah, by all means.
I think I really do appreciate where members' support concerns are regarding this. It is a retrospective application, is to a degree harmful compared to the original position, arguably where wind and the ground level would have been lower. Therefore, arguably would have had less impact next door neighbours, especially severe. Your judgment is whether that extent of change is causing such a degree of harm to warrant refusal and likely appeal. And the reason for likely appeal is because you could possibly split this into two aspects. There is the raising of plot E and consequently the other property behind that, is higher, and my colleague can give the exact amount, but is higher than where it should be, and therefore does the building and windows and the amenity within that building cause harm. Then we have the garden, same argument, does the enjoyment of the occupiers of that garden, would that cause so much more harm than the original scheme to warrant refusal? I would suggest, and I'm not trying to lead you, but I would suggest that you perhaps might want to look at the elements. The other element in the room, forgive the pun, is the fence and line and how that immediately affects the neighbour. So you perhaps have three elements of debate, whether you deal with them as a whole, whether you deal with them as separate, and what the conclusions from that might be something for you to consider in your debating stage. I just wanted to add that in. Thank you.
Before we go to the debate, can I ask a question of Mr. Pateman-G? You mentioned that it would go to appeal. There are two things that we need to be aware of from our point of view as a council with appeals. One is whether we win the appeal, which is neither here nor there really, it doesn't matter. But the other one is whether we get costs awarded against us. Now, my understanding of the appeal regime, and I've been quite a few of them, is that if you can demonstrate that you actually did take into account all of the things that you needed to do, that wouldn't be unreasonable. And even if you didn't win the appeal, you wouldn't have costs against you. So my question to you is, do you think it is likely that in an appeal situation we would, one, win the appeal or not, and two, have costs awarded against us or not?
Obviously, my position is that the recommendation before you is approval. And on that basis, I have considered partly whether or not would be reasonable to refuse this. So that, I think, stands as a matter of record. In terms of costs, I think ultimately we have debated within the report the degree of harm, but the weight you apply to that judgment is ultimately for you as members, as the decision maker in this case. And I think as long as you have adequately explained your judgment of that, therefore I don't think it would be of such risk of costs. If Joanne wants to say anything more to that, I think I could see her indicating, but that's how I simplify it. I'll let Joanne go from there.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Right, colleagues, you've heard the explanation of it. Solicitor will come in.
Thank you, Chair. It's only something very brief that I just wanted to add to what John has said, and I agree with what he said. It's a matter of planning judgment. And as long as you are exercising, whether or not there's harm is a matter of planning judgment. Harm has been identified to amenity. It's how you, as decision maker, it's how you exercise that judgment. And the planning inspector, if you were to refuse today and there was an appeal, the planning inspector would do the same. Costs liability really comes in when the decision maker has acted unreasonably. So if it's really something that they shouldn't have taken into account, or just something that you know, that they've given a reason for refusal and there's literally no evidence to present to an inspector to justify that reason for refusal. So it's about being unreasonable. Costs do not come into it where it's an exercise of planning judgment which is reasonable.
In respect of the building total, although we've all visited the site, I have concerns with the levels in respect of where they've built the bungalows and to the rear where it overlooks the adjacent properties, yeah, and the sheer drop behind it as well. And I'm also concerned about one of the particular bungalows, which seems to be below ground level, and seems to be a bit of a concern where it could be possibly flooded. I don't know if there are provisions for soakaways in any way, shape or form within that.
Yeah, so Soquay is not before us, but as we sort of touched on previously, building control have looked at this and we presume they're okay with this. It's connected to the existing mains, and we couldn't consult Essex Suds on this because it's not a major scheme. So there's not much more I can add in terms of the flooding side to that property. In terms of the overlooking concerns, obviously you visited the site yesterday, and so you've got more fresh views than myself, but these were taken a couple of months back, and this is me stood at the patio doors of plot E facing south towards one of the rear, I think it's number 21. So in my opinion, from that photograph, there was no overlooking concerns. And this is plot D, again, by the patio doors facing south towards, which I believe is number 23. And again, I don't believe there's overlooking concerns. So in my professional judgment, there's not an overlooking issue in terms of the overall balance of the neighbouring impacts. Overlooking isn't an area that I've raised as a concern. Thank you.
I venture to say this, and I don't want a free-for-all, but ultimately, this is a Section 73 application. We obviously have repeated the conditions or adjusted them accordingly in respect of from the original application to this application. That's allowed within the process. But you do have the ability to add conditions, and I'll leave it there for now, but ultimately I will just remind members that maybe as part of the debate, if they feel there are additional measures that maybe should be a consideration, that might be part of the debate, and I may be able to assist you further. Go on, Joan.
Thank you, Chair. Section 73 does allow you to grant the permission subject to the same conditions, to different conditions, or in this case it's an amended condition, but you can consider that. Obviously, conditions are imposed to mitigate harm. There may be conditions that you might want to think about. There might not be conditions that you think can mitigate the harm. There might be conditions you think that can sufficiently mitigate the harm. But just bear in mind, obviously, when in thinking about conditions to mitigate harm, they need to be relevant to planning and to the development. They need to be permitted, enforceable, precise and reasonable in all other respects. Okay, so the purpose of planning conditions is to mitigate harm so that it makes the development acceptable or the planning permission acceptable. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I have one other concern, the trees, or the Lalandii, yeah. In one of the properties, it seems to be cutting out a lot of the light within that property.
Is it on this photo here? Is that what you're referring to?
No, to the rear of the property. Those there. Yeah, the light is being cut from one of those properties. I can't remember which one it was, but was it the second one I think we stood in? I think it was something like that. It was very dark.
Sorry, so are you saying the impact of the future occupants of this is plot E? This would be
Probably, yeah.
Is that what you're?
I think they have lack of light within that property.
A lack of
They have-
light.
They
Okay.
have their lights on all day.
Yeah, so I believe these trees fall within the neighbouring garden, so they're not within the red line boundary of the application. And without measuring exactly, there's quite a distance, probably 10 metres or so separation distance. So yes, there will be a degree of sunlight lost, but not to a significant extent. And as I say, the site does have permission for 5 dwellings, regardless of how we determine this variation. They do still have that permission in place.
Yeah, I have worries of the building, the overlooking part. I think from any one of us, if we lived there, would we want to live with that? Would we really want to live with that? I know it's not really what we're here to question, but I do have reservations over that overlooked part. And from the point of view of the adjacent properties looking towards it, it's not a very pretty view.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's the question in that, but you are entitled to take into account the overlooking. That is within your remit tonight. I'll just repeat my view was, having visited the site, and this photo and this photo here shows to me that there's not going to be overlooking into those neighbouring gardens to the rear. Ultimately, though, in your debate, that's something that you may have a different view on.
Right, colleagues. Anybody? Yes, Councillor Everett.
I'm going to bite the bullet. I would like to propose that we refuse this application on the grounds of loss of amenity for present and future occupiers, both at the rear and to the side, as a result of the change in levels.
Right, I've got a proposal. Do I have a seconder for that? I do. Councillor Goldman seconds it. Right. Before I take the vote, yes, Mr. Pingram.
Sorry, can I just clarify specifically when you say a loss of amenity, specifically what within that, please?
Yes, Planning Manager.
Can I, just before obviously that goes further, in respect of water runoff, if there is a concern in respect of water runoff and that is solvable in a technical way, or if there is a problem at all, if we went to appeal on the basis that we go to appeal saying there's a water problem and there isn't, we get done for costs. We'd also, if we couldn't find a condition that could possibly resolve that issue, which I think that could be a condition, because effectively most drainage issues, if there was one, can be solved by money chucked at it and a system resolved. I think you'd be struggling to defend that as a point. Equally, it might be therefore better to suggest that we take this away, find out more information about that and come back if that is a point that you wish to pursue. In terms of views of massing from the rear, I take it we're talking about the property, or are we talking about the fence come wall? Right. Yep. Okay, so if I was dealing with this completely afresh as an application coming through the door, one of the things we often would put down would be a landscaping condition for which we would approve the hard standing and soft landscaping features of a development, and that would include boundary treatment. If we are saying that this boundary treatment is not visually acceptable, then the suggestion would be that there is the right that we should be saying we could, notwithstanding what's actually built, seek a alternative via a planning condition. That is within your gift, I would suggest. I also feel that if you did that alone as an appeal issue, that may also not be sufficient to withstand an appeal. That's my professional opinion. But if again we went away and found an alternative boundary treatment and that came back, that might save a refusal but give members an opportunity to review that point.
So are you saying to us that you would rather that we deferred this application to look for other boundary treatments that could be acceptable, and work on that basis, putting officers in the frame to do that?
I normally sit here and advise you not to change a design, and that is normally because we're dealing with an application that hasn't been built. What I'm dealing with here, though, are two elements that we would sometimes condition in any event, that being drainage and that being the boundary treatment. If you have got an issue with the house itself, I think the solutions around the house are far more limited. It is what it is there. Therefore, the only real solution of the house would be knock it down. At that point, I think we're going straight off to appeal. When we're dealing with the foundations of the boundary treatment, that might be a reasonable position to negotiate with the applicant, and I'm suggesting to you that you might find it preferable if it's just those two elements, water runoff and that particular boundary treatment at the rear, that we can take this away and come back on that basis. I also feel they are conditionable potentially in any event. So I'm not telling you what to do, I'm just trying to lay out some options for you to consider.
That sounds very sensible to me, and I think it meets most of the concerns that we all have. Is that fair? What's your advice to us about how we word that or do it?
Well, we've got a situation where we've got a proposal that's been seconded on the floor. Now, as I think we're suggesting is that we'd withdraw that at the present moment to consider it in favour, possible at this stage, of a deferment to allow these sort of things to go ahead.
If I may, the simplest way to do this, I think, is you want the satisfaction that what's before you is acceptable, and I think it has to come back for that to be achieved. So we are looking at deferral on the basis that your officers review the water runoff situation and come back to you with adequate information around that, and to come back to you with any discussions that may have been successful regarding the boundary treatment.
Yes, we'll ask the solicitor for that.
I was just going to say, members, so can we, if that original proposal has been withdrawn, so we just need a fresh proposal for deferment based on the matters as outlined by the planning officer, and we need a seconder, and then we'll go to the vote. Thank you.
I'm happy to propose what the head of planning just said.
And Councillor Golden is quite happy to accept as a seconder. So that being the case, I think we've chewed it over for a good hour now. So I don't think we need to go any further, in which case I'll vote on it, and we'll do it by show of hands. Those in favour of deferment, please show. And thank you. And those against? Any abstentions? One abstention. That item will be deferred then. Thank you. In that case, we will we'll have a short break, which will enable us to get the chairman back in the room.
Thank you, everybody. On to item 6, which is planning application 25/00337/4, Holland-on-Sea Bowls Club on Madeira Road, Holland-on-Sea. And to present this application for us, our Head of Planning, Mr. Pateman G. Thank you, Mr. Pateman G.
Do you know what's ironic about doing that is it's just the same sequence. You just keep replugging it in until it gets it right. It doesn't. I don't understand that at all. Right. Have I got to press it? Oh, you have already. Right. Lovely. Thank you. So I'm just presenting this on behalf of the case officer who can't make it tonight. So this application is for Holland-on-Sea Bowls Club. It is for simply the replacement of a timber shed that you saw yesterday. So you saw the location already. It's relatively straightforward. That's the site as outlined in red. Obviously from the road, you can just access essentially a service area with a substation in the corner there. We should have a plan that gives us more details in a moment. The shed is to go sort of enclosed by existing hedgerow that's relatively mature and just in amongst the other buildings that are there already. And the details of the shed, it's a simple green felted timber shed. Not excessive in size, it's only 2.5 metres tall at the top amount at the greatest height, thereabouts. It is for the storage for the Bowls Club. And again, just to put that into context, you've got the pathway that goes in, you've got bins already there. This is the shed itself. Oh, you can't see my cursor, sorry, hang on. That one. So the shed itself, obviously sitting within the front there, you have got the substation and other buildings around it, and you have existing mature landscaping that essentially seals this off for the most part. There are a glimpse view through the entrance gates from the road, but essentially you'll just see the timber shed frontage from that point. In terms of other slides, photos which just confirm what you saw as a more up-to-date situation on the site yesterday. And that's the location of the shed, or proposed location for the shed on the left-hand side there. And that's all I've got in terms of presentation. I'll just leave it on that one. Very simply put, we can't see any harm of this whatsoever, and therefore the recommendation is one of approval. And just to add that the reason it is before you is simply because the owner of the land is tendering district council, so therefore from a transparency point of view, it comes to planning committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pateman G. There are no speakers for this application. So, members, questions for the officer, and first on the list, Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. It's always a pleasure, you know, to go down to the bowling club. It's kept in such beautiful condition, surrounded by flowers, especially on a nice warm sunny day. And what they're asking for, in my mind, it's not relevant. It's very small in the scheme of things. So I suggest that we just approve it, which I'm motion now. A motion for approval on the application.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. And so is that your proposal that we approve this application?
Well, yes,
thank you.
That's my proposal.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Wiggins? And that's seconded by Councillor Wiggins for approval. If there are no further questions for our officer, we have the proposal from Councillor Alexander and seconded by Councillor Wiggins that we approve this application. May I have a show of hands, please, members? And that is unanimous. Thank you, members. So that application is approved. And that just leaves me to tell you the date of next meeting, which is Tuesday, the 8th of July. So enjoy June. See you in July. Thank you and good night.